Geoffrey's smile was brighter than usual. He had investigated the tax collectors with William the Wizard, and was on his way to the council chambers to show his father what he had found. The sun was shining through the windows, leaving the images of the kings of old on the floor of the hall. King Josiah I building the walls of Linwood, King John III overseeing the building of the bridge, King Joram the Unifier, who conquered all land north of the land of ice and fire, and south of the endless mountains. King Joram, the farmer who planted the fields of corn, and kings going back hundreds of years to King George I, the priest who conquered the hold of Linwood. One day, Geoffrey's image will be placed in stained glass as well. What would be said of him? What will be said of father? That thought made him understand his father a bit more. Kings of old were ambitious, and there had been a deal of failure as well. King Joram had tried to conquer the south as well, but was halted by the snow, and when he traveled north he was stopped by a vast desert beyond the endless mountains, where there was no water. Joram the farmer had planted corn until he had sucked all nutrients from the ground. No crops would grow, and there was famine for 5 years. Geoffrey was the last to the council chambers. His father the king turned his head directly at him. "Geoffrey, you're early. Come, sit. We can start now." Punctuality was a virtue in the Middle Kingdom. Georgine was leaned in her chair, resting her head on her finger and thumb, fingering at her tiara. Her brown hair was flowing across her silk lilac dress. "So, Jeff, you've had a week. What have you found about the tax collectors?" The smile on Geoffrey's face said it all. "I'm glad you've asked. William and I had been investigating, talking to shopkeepers and other merchants, and they said they were being taxed 10%. His father leaned forward, his elbows on the table, lacing his fingers together. 10? So they have been taking double? Yes, and after looking at the ledgers, it appears that we were being given only 4% instead of 5%. Geoffrey had never seemed so confident at the council chamber. Even Georgine was smirking at him, though that could mean anything. She always did that. "And before you ask, yes, I went to Lord Commander Fari and had them all seized. They await your judgment in the cells." His father smiled at him. "Yes, excellent work. William, I take it you have done the calculations. What is our actual revenue?" William clumsily flipped through his papers. "Yes, indeed. Yes. Of course. We are only down by 10,032 gold. The king frowned. "Even after accounting for the gold we were cheated? How can this be? Is trade not good?" William shrugged. The king shifted his eyes at Geoffrey. "You have had good fortune in these matters. I will entrust you with finding why we still lack gold. In the meanwhile, I will be traveling to Warren's place for the annual tournament." Georgine rolled her eyes. "You have to go to all of those?" The king nodded. "Will Sir Jacob be competing this year?" The king looked at Sir Jacob. "I don't know, will he?" Sir Jacob shrugged. "Nah. I've won the last 3 years. I don't need another woven crown. Besides, people will stop trying to compete if I keep entering. If someone good shows up this year, maybe I'll enter next year." "Very well," said the king. "Now as for these tax collectors. Will you judge them before you go, or shall we keep them until your return?" Geoffrey asked. "I won't have time, so I want you to judge them in my stead. You will speak with my voice while I am gone, and act with my blessing." What did he just say? In matters of judgment on the tax collectors? Of course. I will judge them. And anything else that comes up. You are acting king while I'm away." Georgine was staring at Geoffrey, but no smirk was on her face. William had his usual grin that he wore perpetually, and his father was looking at him through his eyebrows. I can't be king now. I don't have the proper training. What if I mess something up? What if I get us into war? What if my judgments aren't just? What if... What if... What if... Yes, Father. Good. I haven't received word from Gerald in a while. I hope all went well at Lord Hussock's castle. Knowing him, he probably said something offensive. Even if he didn't, I still expect a declaration of secession from Sweet Hill. Georgine leaned to her other arm. Oh, come now, Father. If you expect so little of him, why send him as an envoy at all? Geoffrey's heart jumped. He would never be so bold as to speak in such a manner to their father, the king. Oh, I know Gerald well enough, and trust he will do his job well. Though it's his strategic mind I'm trusting more than his charm. It's Lord John I'm afraid of. I wasn't invited to 7 gatherings because I brought a ham to his winter celebration. He eats ham at his spring celebration, but is forbidden in winter. Everyone eats ham in winter. You would understand my confusion if you saw the chicks and bunnies standing around the evergreens. You know how your grandfather can get. I'm sure Gerald is fine. I hope he brings us something from Gardenfell. Some seeds, perhaps? Those berries that warm your mouth sound delicious. Having some on the sky terrace will be lovely. William the Wizard raised his hand. I'm afraid those only grow where it is warm year-round, your highness. That's how they get their heat. Nothing like that would grow south of the Endless Mountains. I see. What about those orange fruits I've heard of? The ones with a waxy skin? Those as well, I'm afraid. The king cleared his throat. You can eat all of the hot berries and oranges you wish after we get the road built. But for now, if we could return to matters of the realm and speak of food when we are finished. So they spoke of the walls and the guards, the army and how they were armed, Gerald's goals for the road, and various other things that were extremely boring to Geoffrey. Anxiety had a firm grasp on him long after it was over. Father was setting out for Warren's place, and Geoffrey would be acting king the moment he left. And those tax collectors, too. He would have to do something about them, but what? Should he have them executed? Father seemed to do that a lot. I know they need to be punished. He knocked on her door, and when Georgine opened, she smiled at him. An actual smile, not just the usual smirk. Well, look who it is. She opened the door fully. Come on in, have a seat. Georgine's room was furnished with fine carved wood dressers and silk curtains. I need your help. You're a lot smarter than I am, and Father seems to favor your judgment. Georgine made a face at that. What should I do about the tax collectors? I've never sat on the throne. I want to do what's right. Part of him felt foolish asking his sister about what was right. She seldom disagreed with her father's decisions, where Geoffrey seldom didn't. Certainly her opinion of right and wrong was different than his. When you're the king, whatever decision you make is right. What have you got in mind? That was not the answer he was expecting. Well, I don't really know. He hung his head. The punishment should fit the crime, right? That made sense, so he nodded. What did they do that was wrong? They stole from the people. Georgine stared at him for a moment before raising her eyebrows. And they stole from the kingdom, is what I meant. Yes, so what would be just? How is such a thing set right? He paused for a moment. The people must be repaid. How? What if the gold is already spent? Geoffrey stood. Then we will sell everything they own until every cent can be repaid. Georgine leaned back on her bed. And will that be just? Is that sufficient punishment for the people they've harmed? The families who've gone hungry for lack of coin? No, he said, adamant. They will all be sent to the dungeons, the under-dungeons. A year for each person they cheated. The under-dungeons were built in the time of King Josiah I. There were holes in the ground far beneath the keep, dug 20 feet down and closed at the top with iron bars. The only way out was to have a ladder let down. No man could climb the slippery stone walls. It was always damp and cold, and worst of all, you were alone. There were no beds in the cells either. The undercells were used for only the worst offenders. Georgine gave no indication of either approval or disapproval. Is even that not enough? And they will each lose their thumbs. That should make it harder to be grabbing at coin. She smiled. I can tell you for sure, no sane man will cheat anyone when King Geoffrey IV reigns. When the time came, Geoffrey had Lord Commander Fari gather all of the tax collectors for judgment. Most were from the city, but a few were from as far as Laudertown. There were 25 in total. Geoffrey sat on the throne, staring down nervously at Lord Commander Fari. Fari gave the prince a tiny nod as he tipped his ludicrously large hat. Georgine had her eyes glued on her brother. Let it be known that these men stand guilty of thievery, larceny, and cheating the kingdom and her people, he said, nearly shouting. His voice was soft usually, so he needed to speak up to be heard. Lord Commander Fari shouted back, What is your judgment, your highness? Here we go. My judgment is that every cent be paid back, and that their property be sieged and sold. Sieged? Why did I say sieged? It's seized, not sieged. He pressed through. And they are to serve time in the underdungeons. Someone gasped. He paused. A month for each person they cheated. Lord Commander Fari and everyone else in the room was silent. Georgine shot him a glare. That is all. That is my judgment. You are all dismissed. Welcome to the Storytime Saturday podcast. My name is TGD. I am your host. So this is the second time we see Geoffrey, and he's figured out everything about the the tax collectors, and his father is off on kingly duties somewhere else in the kingdom. So as far as in their home hold in the castle, Geoffrey is the reigning king. So he's got quite the adventure. Even though he doesn't end up going anywhere other than the castle. Geoffrey never leaves the castle, but he's got quite a roller coaster to deal with. And he's certainly he's as we saw in his first chapter, he's very unsure of himself, and we see that even here. So let's go over the writing portion. Same stuff as always, but I mention that Georgine's dress is silk lilac. Her silk lilac dress. Yeah, I don't think that's proper adjective order. I think it should be a lilac silk dress. Silk lilac dress is not like the proper adjective order. So that's grammar. Yeah, okay. I'm giving up there. Now, there's something else that's strange. The wording, where he says, she seldom disagreed with her father's decisions, where Geoffrey seldom didn't. So, Geoffrey seldom didn't disagree with his father. So that it's a double negative, so it really should just be Geoffrey seldom agreed, and that would be better. Plot-wise, we kind of get a hint. I'm going to tell you the truth. Spoiler alert for how this turns out. But Gerald, I didn't have a plan for what Gerald was going to do. So I'm like, okay, so I guess, I'll do something. Maybe he's going there to broker a deal to have a road. to have a road built between the Middle Kingdom and Gardenfell or something. So that's alluded to. A little bit of that is unfolding. We're getting from the king what Gerald is doing. Really, the plot doesn't progress a whole lot in this chapter. We learn what happened with the tax collectors, and I think that this is the end. I think this is the end of the tax collector saga. So I think that's really just a subplot to give Geoffrey something to do. So let's talk about Geoffrey a little bit. We see that his accomplishment has made him more confident since we saw him in the first chapter. Now, I myself am a big believer that confidence and self-worth come from actually accomplishing things. So that's what's on display with Geoffrey here, a bit of that mentality that feeling accomplished comes with accomplishing things. So that's a bit of that philosophy there. So he was happy with his menial task. Like this was, he just went around talking to people, finding what was going on. And in hindsight, that probably would have been good to show. It would have been good to show him actually in town being popular with the people. That might happen eventually. I don't think it happens for a while. We sort of just we just say that he's popular. So this tax collector saga could have been dragged out a little bit longer. I just decided to not do it for whatever reason. Now, me today, this is something that I do now, like maybe to even my detriment, that I would want to actually show him out there talking to the people, gathering information, even if that turned out to be boring. Even if him just going around talking to people was boring, I would still want to do that. That's something that I wouldn't feel comfortable writing it this way. For like an actual novel that I was writing. But anyway, he was happy with his task of just going around talking to people, because that was something that he could do. It was within his comfort zone. It wasn't a massive responsibility. He was just like gathering information, and then he passed it off to the Lord Commander of the city guard. He says, "Okay, now this is the information we have. Now you go deal with it." So he was confident and happy with that. But the king then takes that, like he pushes him out of his comfort zone a ridiculous amount. He says, "Now you're the acting king. You're the acting king while I'm gone." And King's going to be gone for, I don't remember, at least 3 weeks, I think. He's not gone for a short amount of time. Maybe it's 2 weeks, but it's definitely not a short amount of time. So we see when he's confronted with more responsibility, with a task that he's not confident that he has the ability to complete, all of that confidence he gained just drains right out of him. He's completely drained of all of his confidence. All that anxiety and self-doubt floods back. So in his doubt, he goes to his sister, who he knows would do whatever their father would approve of. He knows that their father would approve of whatever Georgine says to do. Now, in his perception, every question she's asking, would that be just? Well, what should they do? What did they do that was wrong? And how should such a thing be set right? What if the gold is already spent? He's viewing these questions as rhetorical, like he's supposed to know the answer. Like there's an implied answer to each of these questions. So he's not really answering how he wants to. He's telling her what he thinks he's supposed to say. So these questions that she's asking him, from his perception, they're all rhetorical questions. So he's saying things that he thinks she wants to hear. He thinks she wants to hear that we're going to seize all of their assets, we're going to put them in the deepest, darkest corner of the dungeon, and we're going to cut their fingers off. He thinks that that's what she wants to hear. And that he thinks that's what would make his father happy and proud. But we see actually in the end of the chapter, at the end of the chapter, he ends up chickening out. He doesn't go through with it. He has their property seized. He has all their assets seized and sold to repay. And he puts them in the Underdungeon, but he doesn't put them in for a year for every person they cheated. He says, instead, a month for each person they cheated. Which is probably still a very, very long time. Like an unimaginably long amount of time to be in solitary confinement. It's still a ridiculous thing. But then he says, that is all. Nothing about cutting their fingers off. Nothing extra. He chickens out. He doesn't go through. He doesn't go through with it. Now, that, as to why he did that, it's not made clear in this chapter. I'm not sure if it's ever made clear. I think that I might have left that up to the audience to figure it out for themselves. It might be because someone gasped as soon as he said they're to serve time in the Underdungeon. Someone went, because of how horrible it is. And then he's like, yeah, I can't do it. I can't go through with it. A month for each person they cheated. Or maybe he's actually making the decision himself. Instead of that being a knee-jerk reaction of him saying, okay, I'll lessen the sentence. Maybe it's him saying, no, a year is too much. Maybe that's him coming to his senses. And that's something that I like about this writing of mine. For all of its flaws, it was interesting, and it let the reader decide how they wanted to view certain characters. It's not really spoon-fed to you how you're supposed to think about people. So that was left ambiguous. Maybe not even intentionally. But I still think that's pretty interesting. Now, we do see Sir Jacob. Sir Jacob is based on one of my friends, and he actually gets a line. He gets a line. What does he say? He says, nah, I've won the last 3 years. I don't need another woven crown. Besides, people will stop trying to compete if I keep entering. So, we put him over in a big way. He's won the last 3 tournaments. So that means for the last 3 years, he was the strongest person in the kingdom. And he doesn't even think it'll be worth his time to enter again. He's like, I already beat all those people. There's no one in the kingdom who's impressive. So this is like the sort of the subtle way of telling the audience that Sir Jacob is the strongest knight in the kingdom. He's won this tournament for the last 3 years in a row. He's like, what do I need another trophy for? It is like a Greek style woven crown that they get, like an Olympic crown or whatever, a wreath. And he's like, what do I need that for? So he's not someone who, he knows he could handily win. He's not like about competing. He doesn't do it. He doesn't care about victory. He wants it to do it if it's interesting for him. And he's like, it's not going to be interesting. So I think that's kind of cool. Now there are other characters in this chapter, like the King and Georgine, but they get their own chapters eventually, and we'll talk more about them in the coming weeks. Now a few notes, some trivia, I guess. I'll start doing this trivia as I notice it. The Land of Ice and Fire is mentioned. A very on-the-nose reference. It's mentioned that King Geoffrey tried to conquer the south, but was halted by the snow in the Land of Ice and Fire. Yeah, King Geoffrey conquered all land north of the Land of Ice and Fire. Land of Ice and Fire, very on-the-nose reference to A Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones books. Very on-the-nose inspiration to the book's inspiration. Very on-the-nose reference. But the Endless Mountains, which is on the northern end of the kingdom, is actually an actual place that's very near to where I grew up. The Endless Mountains is a place where I live. Like it's close by where I live. And I think that's kind of a cool name, the Endless Mountains. The Endless Mountains is a cool name. Kind of fantasy-like, and it's an actual place where I live, the Endless Mountains. Now, when Geoffrey is musing back on the kings of old, he mentions that Joram the farmer planted corn until he had sucked all nutrients from the ground. This is an actual phenomenon in real life called soil exhaustion, where something is like planted in the same thing is planted in the same soil year after year after year. I think with corn specifically, it's like it depletes nitrogen from the soil. I don't quote me on that, but I know this is based on a real thing that actually happens. That people will do things like crop rotation, that they'll change where they plant things. Year after year, they'll change, or like if you don't fertilize properly or do crop rotation, you'll end up with this soil exhaustion. Now, there's this thing called the Underdungeon where Geoffrey is putting the tax collectors, and the Underdungeon is just the black cells from Game of Thrones. Yeah. I'm on the Wiki of Ice and Fire reading, there are no windows or beds in the black cells, and not even a bucket for waste. The straw on the floor smells of urine and feces. The doors are made of wood, 4 inches thick and studded with iron. The dark is absolute. The only light the prisoners receive is when the doors open to feed them, or if they receive a visitor with a torch. The cells are bitterly cold. So, a little bit different since they're a hole in the ground, but that's definitely the inspiration. It's very similar. It's like solitary confinement with no bed and no bathroom. So, very, derivative. This is... That girl was right when she called this a Game of Thrones fan fiction. Okay, it is. The references and the things that I like borrow, it's beyond inspiration. Same things with these stained glasses. The stained glass of the castle is basically the Stone Kings from Winterfell, from the Crypts of Winterfell. That it's often mentioned when the Stark children go down to the Crypts of Winterfell that there's these stone statues of these kings and all the great deeds they did. So that's basically what this is. I guess in real life that's a thing that happens. Stained glass in churches and stuff. Stained glass portrays a story, like Jesus feeding the 5,000, Daniel in the lion's den, things like that. And that's what's in the castle, is these stained glass telling a story. It's like it's a picture telling a story. And that's just a copy paste. This is like this honestly is the epitome of the meme. Yo, mind if I copy your homework? Yeah, just change it up a bit. Although A Song of Ice and Fire itself is quite similar in a lot of ways to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which is a series that George said he was heavily inspired by. So I guess the cycle just continues. And I don't know. I'm not sure what I think about originality. I'm not sure originality really matters. That's a discussion for another day. I don't feel like thinking about that too much right now. Because we've already... this is about as long as I want it to be right now. But I want to mention a few more things. Georgine mentioned she's never had an orange. So there's not much citrus in the Middle Kingdom. And I want you to notice when we're talking about the Endless Mountains and the Land of Ice and Fire that there's snow in the south and a desert to the north. So maybe you should be sort of understanding the geography here of why that would be the case, of why up north there would be a desert where there's oranges growing, and William the Wizard said it's warm all year, and why in the south there's snow. So go ahead and leave a comment. Tell me what you think, what the geography is like. I'm kind of just telling you. Like, I'm telling you without telling you. But tell me what the geography is like. Make sure you like the video if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, go to YouTube right now. _Chalice on YouTube and subscribe and like the video. Go watch some of my other stuff. And come back next Saturday. Because next Saturday, we are going to go back to the 7 holds to Jordan's half-brother, Brandon, and see what he's up to. So look forward to that. Come back next week and see what's up. It's honestly, I think Brandon's a pretty good character too. So make sure you come back and check it out. Come back next week for Storytime Saturday. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us for the podcast. It's been great having you here. And I'll see you next week.